Fiancé's family had a creepy tradition where his dad had to check my virginity before the wedding. I thought refusing would be enough, but now they're ruining my life to keep their dark secret safe. Turns out, I wasn't the first bride to run, and if I don't do something, I won't be the last. My fiancé's family tradition required examining the bride's virginity, so I examined my options and ran. In my fiancé's family, the father was required to check every bride's hymen the night before the wedding while the male relatives watched to ensure she was pure. Marcus told me this 2 nights before our wedding. We were sitting on our apartment floor folding wedding programs, his mother's handwriting listing who would walk when, and he just said it like he was telling me what time to show up for pictures. I laughed because what else do you do when someone says something that insane? But he wasn't joking. His brown eyes stayed serious, the same eyes that made me fall for him at my roommate's birthday party 2 years ago. Tomorrow night, my father needs to examine you. My brothers and Uncle Roberto will be there as witnesses, he said, taking my hands, his thumb doing that circle thing on my palm that usually calmed me down. It's how we ensure the bride is pure. The apartment smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry. We had RSVP cards sorted by table number and a honeymoon to Santorini booked. Everything was perfect 20 seconds ago. Now the room felt like it was tilting. I asked if his mother had done this, my voice coming out weird, like someone was choking me. He said, "Every woman who marries into the Castellano family does it," Marcus said. "Mom, my sister-in-law Maria, my cousin's wives. It proves your love and shows you have nothing to hide." He squeezed my hands tighter, and for the first time his touch made my skin crawl. "You're a virgin anyway, so what's the problem? What's the problem?" Like his father sticking his fingers inside me while his male relatives watched was the same as checking my teeth. We'd waited 2 years because Marcus wanted our wedding night to be special, and I'd thought it was romantic. But now I realized it was about ownership, about making sure the product was unopened before purchase. His family came from old Italian money, the kind where they still spoke Italian at Sunday dinners, and his grandmother wore black every day even though his grandfather died 15 years ago. They had traditions for everything: who carved the turkey, who made the sauce, who got married when. I'd loved being folded into something bigger than myself, loved how his mother taught me her recipes, and his father called me daughter, the warmth of belonging somewhere after growing up in a broken home. But this wasn't tradition. This was a violation dressed up in ceremony. "Marcus, no," I said, pulling my hands away. "That's not happening." His face crumpled like I'd slapped him. He started talking about defying his father, rejecting their family's honor, and how I didn't understand what I was asking him to do. The words tumbled out faster and faster, desperate. "Your family's honor requires violating me?" I asked. "It's not violation." He stood up, pacing our tiny living room like a caged animal. "It's verification. 1 moment of discomfort for a lifetime of acceptance. Mom says it takes less than 5 minutes. I thought about his mother, the same woman who'd held me when I cried about my grandmother dying, who'd spent hours teaching me to make fresh pasta, showing me how to fold the dough just right. She'd spread her legs for his father while his brothers watched. She'd lived with that memory for 30 years, serving Sunday dinner to the men who'd witnessed her humiliation. I grabbed my purse and keys and told him I needed to think, but he followed me to the door, his voice pitching higher, asking what there was to think about. Then he said it. "Unless you've been lying to me, don't," I said, already at the door. "Just don't." I drove to my best friend's apartment in the rain, my engagement ring catching every streetlight. 2 carats, princess cut, exactly what I'd dreamed about since I was 12. The ring felt heavier now, like a shackle. She opened the door to find me sobbing with mascara running down the dress I'd bought special for tomorrow's rehearsal dinner, the dress that was supposed to make his family love me even more. "He wants his dad to check if I'm a virgin," I said, and saying it out loud made it real, made it worse. She poured wine I couldn't drink and listened to every broken word as I explained how the man I loved expected me to spread my legs for his father's inspection. She held my hand for hours until exhaustion finally won, and I passed out mid-sentence on her couch. Then I woke to 43 missed calls and a neck that screamed from the angle. The next morning, I went back to our apartment. Marcus had been crying, his eyes red and puffy. He'd slept in his clothes, empty beer bottles on the coffee table next to our wedding programs. "If you loved me, you'd protect me from this," I said. The slap came fast, his palm connecting with my cheek hard enough to snap my head sideways. We both froze. In 2 years, he'd never raised his voice at me, let alone his hand. Suddenly, every beautiful moment together felt like a lie. "I don't need to prove anything," he said, his voice cold now. I left my ring on the kitchen counter next to the wedding programs we'd folded together 12 hours ago. Our names looked stupid in gold script, like they belonged to different people. People who were in love, people who protected each other. My best friend's couch became my home until Marcus showed up shaking. "I hit you to save your life," he said. "The examination isn't about virginity, it's an auction. The witnesses are buyers. Every woman who's gone through it gets sold after the first anniversary. I had to make you hate me enough to run." My hands shook as I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. An auction. Not a tradition, not an examination, but human trafficking dressed up in family honor. Marcus stood there in my best friend's doorway, his face gaunt, looking nothing like the man who'd proposed to me on the Brooklyn Bridge 14 months ago. I backed away from the door, my friend appearing behind me with her phone already in her hand. Marcus raised his palms, a gesture meant to calm me that only made my skin crawl more. He started gathering papers from his messenger bag, wedding contracts, vendor agreements, anything with my name and address. His hands trembled like his father's did during those Sunday dinners I'd loved so much, when the old man would pour wine and tell stories about the old country. My friend stepped between us, but Marcus kept talking, explaining how his family would track me through the wedding vendors if I didn't let him help. The florist had my credit card, the venue had my parents' address for the final invoice, the photographer had everyone's contact information. He spread the papers on the coffee table, highlighting my information with shaking fingers. I grabbed my phone to call the wedding venue, my fingers fumbling with the numbers. The manager's cheerful voice made me want to scream. I explained I needed to cancel immediately. Family emergency, while Marcus sorted through more documents. My friend watched him like a hawk, her law school training kicking in as she documented everything with her phone. The venue manager explained the cancellation penalty would be $8,000, due immediately, or they'd pursue legal action. My savings account had exactly $9,000, earmarked for first month's rent and security deposit on a new apartment after the honeymoon. I agreed to the penalty, my voice steady even as my future crumbled. Marcus's phone rang, his mother's ringtone, an Italian love song she'd danced to at our engagement party. He answered, turning away from us, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I heard him breathe something that sounded like, "Please understand," before hanging up. His face had gone gray. My mother picked up on the third ring. I tried to explain, words tumbling out about Marcus's family, about trafficking, about the auction, but saying his family sells women out loud sounded insane, like some racist hysteria about Italians and organized crime. My mother's silence stretched until she finally asked if I'd been drinking. I hung up. My friend pulled me aside while Marcus continued sorting papers. She reminded me her bar exam was in 3 weeks, that the Castellanos funded her firm's scholarship program, that helping me could end her career before it started. I saw her loyalty wavering in real time, watched her calculate the cost of standing by me. She said she'd help today, but after that, I'd need to find somewhere else to stay. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin asking if I could pick her up from school. Her mom was stuck at work again. Any other day, I would have said yes immediately. But through the window, I saw Mrs. Castellanos' black Mercedes idling across the street. The choice felt impossible. Help family who needed me now, or protect myself from the family I was supposed to join tomorrow. I chose my cousin. By the time I got back 2 hours later, Mrs. Castellano had already been to my church. My friend filled me in, how Marcus's mother had shown up for afternoon prayer group, tears streaming as she shared how her future daughter-in-law had broken her son's heart and disappeared. The congregation wrapped their arms around her, promised prayers for our family's healing. She'd established the narrative while I was gone. The next morning, I called every vendor. The photographer threatened to sue for his full fee. The caterer kept my deposit. The church required written notice that I couldn't provide without going there in person. Each conversation drained my bank account further. When I called my boss to explain I'd need a few days off, I blamed a family emergency. HR documented everything, just like they always did. I didn't realize I was supporting the Castellanos story about an unstable bride. Marcus showed up at the hospital where he worked, hyperventilating in the emergency room where everyone knew him as the sweet Castellano boy who brought cannoli for the nursing staff. They gave him oxygen and sympathy while texting about the poor guy whose fiancé had vanished. My own cousin started defending him after he'd helped with her science project last month. The betrayal stung worse than his slap. I needed our marriage license from the courthouse to prove we'd never actually married, but retrieving it meant creating an official record of my presence. The clerk at the marriage license office was Marcus's cousin Sophia. I'd met her at Easter dinner, watched her kids hunt for eggs in the Castellanos' backyard. Going there would be walking into a trap. I went anyway. The security camera caught me entering the courthouse records office at 11:47 a.m., my face clear in the footage. Sophia's expression when she saw me was almost sympathetic, like she knew exactly why I was there. She handed me the documents without a word, but I knew that footage would surface later, making me look obsessive, unstable, like a woman scorned. 3 days later, I spotted Maria at the pediatrician's office. Marcus's sister-in-law sat in the waiting room with her son, her face pale and drawn. Our eyes met across the room full of crying toddlers and exhausted mothers. She mouthed something that looked like help before looking away. Her son played with blocks while she gripped her purse like a lifeline. The Castellano family lawyer had been busy. My college roommate called to warn me they'd found the restraining order I'd filed against an ex-boyfriend junior year. The context, that he'd stalked me for months, didn't matter. They had paperwork showing, as the lawyer put it, a pattern of accusations. Every text I'd sent in our wedding planning group chat became evidence. My excitement about joining the family, my gratitude for their acceptance, all weaponized against me. I tried warning other women at the country club where the Castellanos held membership. The management flagged my attempts as harassment before I could finish explaining. Security escorted me out while Mrs. Castellanos' tennis partners watched from the court. My desperation made me look exactly like the unhinged ex-fiancé they'd been told about. Marcus still had access to our shared bank account. I'd forgotten to remove him in the chaos of leaving. The transaction history showed regular transfers from various Castellano family accounts. Always the same amount, always 13 months apart. I screenshot everything before he could close the account, but exhaustion made me sloppy with my own work. I missed an important deadline. and my performance review now included reliability concerns. My mother called after my father's biggest client threatened to pull his contract. The client was Mr. Castellano. She begged me to apologize, to make this right, choosing my father's job over believing her daughter. The betrayal cut deeper than Marcus's slap. I stopped answering her calls. At the grocery store, clerks who'd smiled at me for years now avoided eye contact. Mrs. Castellano's prayer request about the troubled young woman who broke her son's heart had spread through our small community like wildfire. Whispers followed me down the aisles. The butcher who'd saved the good cuts for our wedding dinner turned his back when I approached the counter. Marcus's lie about my medication non-compliance aligned perfectly with the pharmacy records showing my anxiety prescription. Never mind that I'd been taking it responsibly for years, that it was for normal anxiety, not whatever instability they were implying. The truth didn't matter when the lie fit their narrative better. My best friend admitted she needed the Castellano recommendation letter for her law school application. Her scholarship depended on it. She let me stay one more night but made it clear this was the end. I understood. I'd have made the same choice in her position, probably. When I tried to prove Marcus had lied about his parents' perfect marriage, I accidentally revealed I'd known about his mother's affair. She'd confided in me last Christmas after too much wine, crying about the loneliness of a loveless marriage. Now my knowledge made me look vindictive, like I was lashing out with family secrets. I bought wine after another failed attempt to get someone to listen. One bottle to help me sleep. The liquor store clerk, another Castellano family friend, took photos of my purchase. Within hours, my drinking problem became part of the narrative. The unstable ex-fiancé drowning her sorrows. That night, Marcus texted from a number I didn't recognize. I tried to save you. The words sat on my phone screen while I lay on my friend's couch for the last time. Tomorrow I'd need to find somewhere else to stay. My savings were nearly gone, my family had chosen their side, and the Castellanos had won every round so far. But Maria's terrified face at the pediatrician's office haunted me. That mouthed help meant something. I thought about the 13-month transfers, about Mrs. Castellano's tears that seemed too practiced, about a family tradition that was actually a business model. Marcus said he'd tried to save me, but what about the women who couldn't be saved? What about Maria, trapped in that house with her son, knowing what they'd done to her and powerless to stop it? The wine bottle sat unopened on the coffee table. I needed a clear head for what came next. The Castellanos thought they'd broken me, isolated me, destroyed my credibility. They were mostly right, but they'd also revealed themselves. Every move they made to discredit me also showed their methods, their connections, their fear of exposure. I started making a list on my phone. Every transfer amount, every date, every person who'd suddenly turned against me. The pattern was all there if anyone would look. The problem was getting someone to look when the Castellanos had spent decades building their reputation. My phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time it was a photo. Me at the courthouse looking frantic and disheveled. Whoever sent it wanted me to know they were watching, documenting, building their case against me. I saved the photo anyway. Evidence worked both ways. Tomorrow I'd have to leave my friend's apartment. My job was hanging by a thread. My family had abandoned me. My reputation was destroyed. But I was starting to understand something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Maria's mouthed plea for help, about the 13-month transfers, about the other women who'd married into the Castellano family and disappeared into their roles as wives and mothers, never speaking about what happened after their first anniversary. Marcus was right about one thing. He had tried to save me, but in doing so, he'd exposed something the Castellanos had kept hidden for generations. They'd survived by choosing vulnerable women, women without strong support systems, women who could be isolated and controlled. They hadn't counted on choosing one who had nothing left to lose. I closed my eyes on my friend's couch for the last time, knowing tomorrow would bring new attacks, new attempts to break me. But something had shifted. I wasn't just running anymore. I was gathering evidence. And somewhere in that perfect Italian-American family's history, there had to be other women like me. Women who'd run. Women who'd tried to speak up. Women whose stories had been buried under accusations of instability and drinking problems. The Castellanos had made one mistake. They'd shown me exactly how they operated. Every move they made to discredit me also revealed their playbook. And tomorrow, I'd start using it against them. The Castellanos started attending my church the following Sunday. They sat in my grandmother's old pew, third row from the front, where I'd spent every Sunday of my childhood. Mrs. Castellano wore pearls and a modest black dress, her husband's hand resting protectively on her knee. Marcus flanked them with his brothers, all in pressed suits, looking like grieving saints. The congregation welcomed them with open arms. I watched from my car in the parking lot, too afraid to go inside my own sanctuary. The church secretary emerged after service and walked straight to my car. She tapped on my window and handed me a letter. The church board had received concerning reports about my behavior. They suggested I seek counseling before returning to worship. The Castellanos had taken my spiritual home in less than a week. That afternoon, I ran into Maria at the pharmacy. She was picking up medication while her son played with the blood pressure machine. When she saw me, her whole body tensed. I approached carefully, pretending to browse vitamins nearby. She whispered quickly while examining aspirin bottles, explaining that her husband monitored her phone, her email, her every movement. She tried to leave once. They'd threatened to take her son, said no judge would give custody to an unstable mother who abandoned her family. The pharmacist called her name, and she grabbed her prescription and fled. I realized our conversation had been witnessed. The pharmacy security guard, whose daughter went to school with Maria's son, was already on his phone. By evening, Maria's version would be different. I'd harassed her, made wild accusations, frightened her child. The truth evaporated the moment she left the store. My old wedding planning emails started circulating among the Castellanos' friends, messages where I'd gushed about joining their family, about how lucky I felt, how I couldn't wait to be a Castellano. The context was stripped away, leaving only my enthusiasm as evidence of instability when things didn't work out. My own words became weapons against me. Marcus's nephew started appearing at places I frequented. The 8-year-old would be at the coffee shop with his nanny, at the library with his tutor. He'd look at me with those big Castellano eyes and repeat things in his innocent voice. His daddy said I was sick and needed help. His family was worried about me. The child's trust had been weaponized, his innocence used to spread their narrative. My neighbor's Ring doorbell had captured part of a conversation between Marcus and me from weeks ago. Out of context, the footage seemed to support his version of events. Me gesturing wildly, him trying to calm me down. The audio was muffled, but body language told a story. The footage made its way to the Castellano lawyer within days. I tried filing a civil complaint about the trafficking claims. The clerk at the courthouse looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. Without evidence, my accusations sounded like the ravings of a bitter ex-fiancé. The Castellanos' lawyer filed a counterclaim for defamation the same day. Now I wasn't just crazy, I was malicious. One night, I remembered Marcus used his mother's birthday for every password. Her birthday was November 15th. I still had access to our old shared cloud storage from when we'd planned the wedding together. My fingers shook as I typed in 11:15. The account opened. Hundreds of files appeared. Wedding planning documents, photos from our trips, shared grocery lists. But buried in a folder marked tax documents were drafts of emails Marcus had never sent. Emails to someone named Father Francis, begging for guidance. Emails describing the family tradition in detail, his horror at learning the truth, his plan to save me by making me hate him. My heart hammered as I screenshot everything before the password could be changed. Maria's Instagram stories became a study in coded communication. Pictures of family dinners with captions about traditions. Photos of her son with quotes about protecting what matters most. Each post seemed normal to casual viewers, but I saw the pattern. She was documenting her isolation, her fear, leaving breadcrumbs for anyone who knew how to look. My therapist, who I'd seen for anxiety since college, received a subpoena. The Castellanos' lawyer wanted records of any sessions where I'd discussed paranoid thoughts about Marcus's family. My safe space, where I'd processed normal relationship anxieties, was being twisted into evidence of mental instability. I attempted to record Marcus during a chance encounter at the grocery store. I kept my phone in my pocket, the voice recorder running, but he spotted the red light through the fabric. He smiled sadly and shook his head. His whispered words about still trying to frame his family would sound caring to anyone listening. The recording was useless. Maria's son's school called me. I was still listed as his emergency contact from when I'd helped with pickup during wedding planning. The school needed someone to get him. Maria was unreachable. I arrived to find the boy fevering and miserable. As I signed him out, I realized this was leverage. The Castellanos couldn't remove me from the list without raising questions, but my continued presence gave me access to Maria's world. The priest at my church chose his path when the youth center's funding came up for renewal. The Castellanos had built that center, donated every year to keep it running. Father Michael delivered sermons about forgiveness, about not bearing false witness, about the danger of bitterness. Each word felt directed at me, sitting in my car in the parking lot, watching through the live stream. I noticed Mrs. Castellano wearing my grandmother's brooch at a church function, the pearl and sapphire pin that had gone missing from my apartment months ago. She touched it often, making sure I saw it in every photo posted to the church's Facebook page. My grandmother's jewelry on the chest of my enemy, and no way to prove it was mine. The Castellanos made an offer through their lawyer. Sign an NDA, leave town, never speak about the family again. In exchange, they'd drop the defamation suit and give me $10,000 for relocation expenses. The lawyer presented it as generosity, a way to move forward. I refused. My refusal was immediately reframed. If I really believed my accusations, why wouldn't I take money to start fresh somewhere safe? Unless this was about extortion, not justice. Unless I wanted to profit from lies about a good family. The narrative shifted again, painting me as greedy rather than just unstable. I discovered something crucial in Maria's coded messages. She mentioned insurance in a comment about keeping family memories safe. Insurance meant documentation. Somewhere, Maria had been gathering evidence, just like me, but finding it without putting her in danger seemed impossible. My investigation led me to examine Mrs. Castellanos' history. Buried in old church newsletters, I found a mention of her sister who'd moved away suddenly 30 years ago. The sister who'd been engaged to a Castellano cousin. The sister who'd broken tradition and disappeared. Mrs. Castellano hadn't just endured the examination. She'd watched her own sister escape and chosen to stay. My brother called after weeks of silence. His son needed insulin, and his insurance came through his job at a Castellano-owned construction company. He believed me, he said, but he couldn't risk his son's health. He asked me to stop making waves. Then quieter, he mentioned he'd been photocopying employment records, names, dates, women who'd left the company suddenly after about 13 months. He'd mail them to me if I promised to be careful. I planted false information with 3 different people from my support group, telling each a different story about where I was staying. Within days, I knew who was reporting to the Castellanos. The woman who'd seemed most sympathetic, who'd cried with me over coffee, was the one whose version appeared in threatening texts from unknown numbers. I orchestrated an encounter with Marcus's aunt at the pharmacy. She had high blood pressure, picked up medication every month like clockwork. I struck up conversation about the heat, about health, about family stress. She swiped her loyalty card, and I memorized the number. Later, I called pretending to be her, checking on points and purchase history. The automated system revealed regular purchases of Plan B, despite her being 55 and supposedly devoted to her husband. The cloud storage revealed more before Marcus changed the password. Contracts written in Italian, with what looked like signatures and monetary amounts. I didn't speak Italian, but numbers translate universally. 50,000, 75,000, always in euros, always with dates roughly 13 months after wedding dates I recognized. The wedding photographer emerged from the woodwork, demanding payment for services rendered. He had the full wedding prep shoot we'd done 6 months ago. I met him at a coffee shop to negotiate, hoping his photos might have captured something useful. In the background of seemingly innocent family portraits were meetings, handshakes, exchanges I hadn't noticed at the time. Meeting the photographer meant missing a crucial appointment with Maria. The social worker noted my absence, marked me as uncooperative in helping Maria's son. Another mark against my credibility, another point for the Castellanos. Every choice had consequences I couldn't foresee. Legal fees for fighting the defamation suit forced me to sell my car. I watched the tow truck take away my last piece of independence while the Castellanos renovated their vacation home. The contractor mentioned they'd paid cash, unusual for such a large project. Blood money disguised as family wealth. I confronted Marcus's mother at her favorite cafe. The young waitress who'd served us during wedding planning watched in horror as I demanded answers about the missing women. Mrs. Castellano remained calm, sipping her espresso, letting my desperation speak for itself. The waitress, who'd idolized the perfect Castellano family, saw me escorted out by management. Another witness turned against me. My workplace finally had enough. Human Resources called me in to discuss the hostile environment I'd created with my accusations against a respected family. Co-workers felt uncomfortable. Clients had complained. They offered me a choice: resign quietly or be fired for cause. I resigned. My replacement was Marcus's cousin, hired within days. I slept in my friend's garage after her landlord threatened eviction if I stayed in the apartment. The concrete floor and sleeping bag were my new reality while the Castellanos posted photos from charity galas. They smiled for cameras in designer clothes paid for with the suffering of women like Maria. My father arrived at the garage one morning. He looked older, defeated. The Castellanos had given him an ultimatum: control his daughter or lose his biggest client. 20 years of building his business, and it all depended on keeping the Castellanos happy. He begged me to stop torturing the family with lies about good people. He used those exact words, like they'd been fed to him. My investigation had consequences I hadn't anticipated. Maria's friend lost her custody battle when her ex-husband's lawyer brought up her association with the conspiracy theorist attacking the Castellano family. Her children went to live with their father because she'd been seen talking to me at the grocery store. Another friend's marriage crumbled under the pressure. Her husband couldn't handle the whispers at his job, the questions about why his wife associated with someone so clearly unstable. She chose her marriage over our friendship. I understood, even as it left me more isolated. I kept going despite the destruction in my wake. Each revelation about the Castellanos came at the cost of someone else's life falling apart, but stopping meant letting Maria and others remain trapped. The moral weight crushed me daily, but I couldn't quit. My last ally, a woman from group therapy, asked a question that haunted me. What if Marcus had lied about the auction too? What if this was all an elaborate manipulation to destroy me for leaving him? I couldn't answer with certainty anymore. The truth had become so twisted, so buried under lies and counterlies, that even I sometimes doubted what I knew. During one desperate moment months ago, I'd keyed Marcus's car after an argument about his mother's controlling behavior. I'd apologized immediately, paid for the repair. Now that incident surfaced in the Castellano lawyer's filing. Evidence of my violent tendencies and property destruction. Every mistake I'd ever made was being cataloged and weaponized. Looking through old videos from Maria's baby shower, I spotted something I'd missed. During her speech about family traditions, her hands had trembled. She'd mentioned being grateful for the Castellano family's protection, but her eyes had darted to the exits. She'd been asking for help 6 months ago, and I'd been too blind to see it. The Castellano lawyer filed an expedited defamation suit. My own lawyer withdrew, citing a conflict of interest that materialized overnight. I suspected the Castellanos had found leverage on him too. Legal aid wouldn't touch the case. I was alone in the courtroom, representing myself against a team of suits. Through all of this, I began to understand something about Marcus's father. He genuinely believed he was protecting family honor through generations of tradition. In his mind, the examination ensured purity. The auction ensured the women stayed with good families who'd paid well for them. It was twisted love mixed with cultural obligation, not pure evil. That made it worse somehow. The same dynamic appeared throughout the family. They participated not out of malice but out of misguided loyalty. Mothers who'd endured it insisted their daughters-in-law do the same. Brothers who'd witnessed it became complicit through silence. Generation after generation, trauma disguised as tradition. I convinced Maria's babysitter to deliver a message during a playground visit, a simple phrase that would mean nothing to anyone listening. She agreed reluctantly, whispering to Maria while pushing her son on the swings. The message was clear. The bird wants to sing. Maria's eyes widened, but she kept pushing the swing, saying nothing. My old ethical boundaries crumbled as desperation grew. I social engineered bank information by calling branches pretending to be various Castellano family members. I gathered routing numbers, transaction patterns, anything that might prove the money trail. Each lie I told culled another piece of who I used to be. Small victories felt hollow. When a judge granted a restraining order against Marcus, I saw genuine pain in his eyes across the courtroom. We were both mourning different losses. He'd lost the woman he loved to his family's sickness. I'd lost the man I loved to the same poison. The order felt like admitting our love had died. The Castellanos' counterclaim gained media traction. A small local blog picked up the story of a prominent family being extorted by a bitter ex-bride. The narrative was compelling. Established family, charitable works, unhinged woman making wild accusations. Comment sections filled with people who knew the Castellanos, defending their character. Everything hinged on Maria now. Her testimony could validate everything or destroy what little credibility I had left. But testifying meant risking her son, her safety, her carefully constructed survival within the Castellano prison. I was asking her to sacrifice everything for truth. My past kindness haunted me in unexpected ways. I'd spent hours teaching Marcus's grandmother to use her new smartphone, setting up video calls with relatives in Italy. Now she tearfully told everyone how I'd betrayed their trust after they'd welcomed me so warmly. Every good deed became evidence of their generosity and my ingratitude. Hospital colleagues chose sides based on practicality. The Castellanos donated to the cardiac wing, the children's ward, the annual fundraising gala. I was one former employee making wild accusations. The math was simple. Good people doing good works couldn't possibly be involved in something so evil. The district attorney's office finally agreed to meet with me. The ADA, a tired woman who'd seen too much, listened to my story with professional skepticism. She explained the burden of proof, the difference between cultural traditions and criminal acts. Without concrete evidence of money changing hands, of women being sold, there was no case. Unusual traditions weren't illegal. I called in my last favor from the director of a victims advocacy group. My mother had saved her daughter from drowning years ago at a community pool. She owed us everything, she'd always said. But when I asked for help, she offered only a lawyer referral and regret. The organization couldn't risk its reputation on unproven claims. Discovery in the civil suit revealed painful truths. Mrs. Castellano had known about the trafficking, but stayed to protect her children from worse fates. Other families in their circle had darker traditions, more violent outcomes. She'd chosen what she saw as the lesser evil, sacrificing herself to save her daughters from worse. Maria had been documenting everything, just as I'd suspected. For 23 months, she'd gathered evidence while living in terror. USB drives hidden in her son's toys, photos cached in obscure cloud folders, recordings made on burner phones. She'd built a case while smiling at family dinners, knowing one discovery meant death or worse. During a supervised visit with Maria's son, I felt the weight of something unusual in his teddy bear. My fingers found a small USB drive sewn into the seam. Maria had been watching from across the playground, her eyes pleading. I palmed the drive, my heart racing. This was the evidence we needed. The USB contained everything. Financial records showing payments from family investors exactly 13 months after weddings, photos of meetings with potential buyers, audio recordings of negotiations in Italian and English. Maria had risked everything to compile this proof. I learned that some women chose the auction over divorce. Leaving meant losing their children, being cut off from all support, starting over with nothing. The buyers were often relatives or family friends who'd treat them well. It was slavery with golden chains, but some found it preferable to destitution. The system perpetuated itself through impossible choices. Maria and I developed a plan. She'd testify in exchange for immediate protective custody for her and her son. I'd provide the evidence to support her claims. We both knew the cost would be everything. Our families, our communities, our safety. But the alternative was letting it continue for another generation. Marcus's father made a notarized statement about family investments that contradicted his alibi for several dates. He'd claimed to be at business meetings when payment exchanges occurred, but his own paperwork placed him at family gatherings instead. The lie was small but significant. After 3 months of building our case, I presented everything to the ADA. Financial records, Maria's recordings, the USB evidence, witness statements from women who'd fled the family years ago. The prosecutor's skepticism cracked, then crumbled. She saw what I'd seen, a generational system of trafficking disguised as tradition. The investigation expanded quickly. 3 generations of Castellano women had been sold or silenced. Some had died in suspicious accidents. Others lived comfortable lives with their buyers, unable to leave but unwilling to risk their children's safety by speaking out. The pattern was clear once you knew where to look. Both families prepared for the storm ahead. The Castellanos hired more lawyers, called in favors, prepared to fight with everything they had. My family, what was left of it, braced for the shame of association. We all knew this would end with destruction on both sides. 6 months of investigation revealed the full scope. Not just the Castellanos, but 3 other prominent families in our community ran similar operations. They shared buyers, compared prices, maintained the system through mutual protection. What started as one family's tradition had become an underground market. The prosecutor prepared charges carefully: human trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering. Each count supported by Maria's meticulous documentation and corroborating evidence from financial records. The case was solid, but would take months to prosecute. In the meantime, we lived in limbo. Marcus agreed to testify for the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. His confession filled in gaps, explained the psychological manipulation used to ensure compliance. He'd been raised to see it as protection, only understanding the horror when he'd fallen in love with me. His cooperation felt like a betrayal to his family and validation to me. Other women came forward slowly. Marcus's cousin who'd fled to California, a woman who'd escaped her buyer after 2 years. Each story added weight to the prosecution's case. The Castellano family's reputation crumbled as victim after victim spoke their truth. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon. I spent my days preparing testimony, reviewing evidence, trying to stay sane while my life existed in suspension. Maria and her son lived in a safe house, protected but imprisoned by their choice to speak out. We texted daily, supporting each other through the wait. I moved to a new city temporarily, staying with a distant relative who barely knew me. The Castellano influence didn't reach there, but neither did any support system. I worked temp jobs, saved money, tried to imagine a future after the trial. Some days I succeeded. The investigation uncovered something that changed everything. Mr. Castellano hadn't just participated in the family tradition, he'd been sold himself. At 19, his own father had traded him to a cousin for business connections. He'd perpetuated the cycle he'd been trapped in, victim becoming victimizer across generations. This revelation reframed the entire case. Not just evil people doing evil things, but a system of trauma passed down like a cursed heirloom. Each generation thought they were protecting the next while actually destroying them. The prosecutor added charges but also recommended psychological evaluation for all involved. Maria's testimony date arrived. She entered the courtroom in a simple black dress, her son safely with her sister out of state. For 3 days, she detailed the horror of her marriage, the auction, the life that followed. Her voice never wavered, even when describing the worst moments. She was the hero I'd tried to be. The Castellano accountant flipped when faced with evidence of his involvement. He'd thought he was helping with tax evasion, not human trafficking. His testimony revealed the financial structure, how payments were disguised as investments, how the money moved through legitimate businesses. 8 months of negotiation had bought his cooperation. Digital forensics recovered deleted files from the family computers. Contracts going back decades. Names and prices clearly listed. The evidence was overwhelming. What had seemed like paranoid accusations months ago now appeared as documented fact in court exhibits. The truth emerged in layers. Love and ownership intertwined in sick ways. Mothers who'd been sold convincing themselves their daughters needed the same experience. Fathers who'd bought wives believing they were saving them. Everyone in the system, both victim and perpetrator. Trauma bonding them together. The judge ordered investigations into every Castellano marriage over 40 years. Social services intervened where children were involved. The family empire crumbled as assets were frozen. Businesses investigated, connections severed. The prominent family became pariahs overnight. I was asked to speak at sentencing about the impact on my life. I requested therapy and accountability, not just prison time. The cycle needed to break, not just punish. Some victims agreed, others wanted maximum sentences. We were united in survival, but divided in what justice meant. Immediate custody changes saved some children. Maria's son went to live with her sister permanently. Other children were placed with relatives outside the family circle. The next generation might escape the poison, though trauma would echo for years. The community split between those who'd suspected something and those who refused to believe. Local businesses that had profited from Castellano money faced boycotts. Churches that had taken their donations faced questions about complicity. The reckoning went beyond just the family. A year later, I lived in a new city permanently. Trust came hard, maybe impossible. I flinched when I heard Italian being spoken, avoided anyone who reminded me of the Castellanos. Therapy helped but couldn't erase the scars. I'd survived, but at a cost I was still calculating. A federal trafficking prevention program cited our case as a study in how generational trauma disguised itself as tradition. Training materials for social workers, law enforcement, and medical professionals included warning signs we'd all missed. Maybe future victims would be saved by our suffering. Marcus served a minimum sentence after his cooperation. His letters arrived monthly, full of apology and explanation. I never answered but couldn't bring myself to throw them away. He was rebuilding his life too, carrying his own scars from a family that had twisted love into ownership. The other families involved faced their own prosecutions. The network collapsed as each trial revealed more connections. What had seemed like isolated tradition was exposed as organized crime spanning generations. Dozens of women found freedom, though freedom came with its own challenges. Support groups formed for survivors. We met monthly, sharing stories and strategies for building new lives. Some had been sold, others had escaped before marriage. A few were family members who'd enabled the system unknowingly. All of us were navigating the aftermath together. Mrs. Castellano received counseling instead of prison time. Her cooperation and status as a victim herself earned leniency. She lived quietly now, estranged from most of her family, trying to make amends where possible. I'd seen her at the grocery store once, both of us pretending not to notice the other. The financial settlements helped some victims start over. Money seized from the trafficking operation was distributed to survivors. It wasn't enough to compensate for what we'd lost, but provided practical help for rebuilding. I used mine for continued therapy and vocational training. Some days I wondered if I'd made the right choice. The destruction had been so complete, so many lives shattered. But then I'd get a message from a woman who'd escaped because of our case, who'd found the courage to leave because we'd spoken up. Those messages made the cost worthwhile. The Castellano name became synonymous with the scandal. Marcus's brothers served varying sentences. His father died in prison. Whether from shame or age, nobody was certain. The family tradition ended, but its echoes would last generations. I found purpose in advocacy work, speaking at conferences, training law enforcement, helping other survivors navigate the legal system. My story became a teaching tool. My pain transformed into prevention. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it had meaning. Maria thrived in her freedom. She went back to school, became a social worker specializing in domestic trafficking. Her son grew up knowing his mother was a hero who'd risked everything for their freedom. They visited me sometimes, the only family I felt safe claiming. The wedding dress I'd never worn hung in my closet for months before I donated it. Some other bride would wear it to her happily ever after, never knowing its history. I hoped her love story would be real, that her traditions would be joyful, that her family would protect rather than prey. Recovery wasn't linear. Good days mixed with bad ones, triggers appearing unexpectedly. A certain cologne would send me spiraling. Italian restaurants were impossible. Wedding announcements made me nauseous. But slowly, very slowly, I built a life around the broken pieces. The investigation had revealed over 50 victims across 3 generations. Some had died mysteriously. Others lived quietly with their buyers. Many had escaped but never spoken up. Each story added to the horror, but also to the validation. We hadn't been crazy or vindictive. We'd been right. I learned to live with the duality, grateful for my escape but mourning what I'd lost, proud of my courage but aware of the destruction it had caused, strong enough to survive but forever marked by the experience. Recovery meant accepting all these contradictions. The case study became required reading in sociology programs. How family traditions could hide trafficking, how communities could enable abuse through willful blindness, how victims could be discredited systematically. Academic analysis of our lived nightmare, necessary but painful to see. 5 years later, I could almost imagine trusting someone again. Therapy had given me tools, time had softened some edges, purpose had provided direction. I wasn't the woman who'd folded wedding programs with Marcus, but I was someone. Scarred but surviving, broken but building. The Castellano houses sold one by one. Their businesses dissolved or were bought by others. The family scattered, some to prison, others to distant cities where the name meant nothing. The empire built on suffering had fallen, though its victims would carry the weight forever. Sometimes I dreamed about the life I'd planned. The honeymoon in Santorini, the children who'd have Marcus's eyes, the Sunday dinners with family. Then I'd wake up in my small apartment, alone but free, and remember that those dreams had been built on lies. This reality, painful as it was, contained truth. Maria called on the anniversary of her testimony. We didn't need to speak much. Just hearing each other breathe was enough. We'd survived something together that bonded us beyond words. Sisters not by blood but by brave choices made in impossible circumstances. The new federal legislation inspired by our case passed after years of advocacy. Stronger protections for trafficking victims, better training for law enforcement, mandatory reporting for certain professionals, laws written in our blood but hopefully preventing future bloodshed. I kept one photo from my time with Marcus, not of us together, but of his grandmother teaching me to make pasta. Before I knew the truth, when love felt simple and family meant safety. A reminder that even in the darkest systems, there had been moments of genuine connection. Those moments made the betrayal worse, but also reminded me that I'd had the capacity to love. Maybe someday, I would again. The story ended not with justice, exactly, but with survival. The Castellano tradition was broken, its victims freed or at least acknowledged. We'd paid in ways that couldn't be calculated, lost things that couldn't be recovered. But we'd also found strength we didn't know existed, forged bonds through shared trauma, and prevented future generations from suffering as we had. My phone rang with an unknown number. Usually I didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A young woman's voice trembling, asking if I was the one who'd exposed the Castellanos. Her fiancé's family had a similar tradition. She'd found my story online, recognized the signs, needed help getting out. I gave her the number for the victim advocacy group, promised to meet her tomorrow, told her she wasn't crazy. After we hung up, I sat in my small kitchen, looking at the life I'd built from ruins. Not the life I'd planned, but one with purpose. The Castellano tradition had ended with my refusal, but its victims would need support for generations. This was my work now, my purpose carved from pain. Tomorrow I'd meet another scared woman, help her see the truth hidden behind tradition, support her escape from a system designed to trap her. The cycle continued, but now we had tools to break it. Knowledge, support, proof that survival was possible. The cost had been everything I'd thought I wanted. The reward was a truth that might save others. Most days that felt like enough. The discovery in Mrs. Castellano's past explained everything. Her sister hadn't just moved away, she'd been the first to refuse the examination. The family had erased her existence, but digital archives revealed her fate. She'd lived quietly in Maine for 30 years, running a small bakery, never marrying. I found her through property records and made the call that changed everything. Her voice cracked when I mentioned the Castellanos. She agreed to provide a sworn statement about her experience, about the threats, about why she'd stayed silent. Her testimony would prove the pattern went back generations. I drove 12 hours straight to meet her, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Maria's evidence from the USB drive needed authentication. I spent days organizing financial records, creating timelines, cross-referencing dates with wedding announcements. Each payment corresponded to a woman who'd suddenly become reclusive after marriage. The pattern was undeniable once mapped out properly. The ADA assigned a forensic accountant to verify the money trail. He worked through the night, tracing funds through shell companies and overseas accounts. By morning, he'd confirmed what Maria had risked everything to document. The trafficking operation had generated millions over 4 decades. I received a package from my brother with no return address. Inside were photocopies of employment records from the Castellano Construction Company, women hired as office managers, then terminated exactly 13 months later with generous severance packages, the same women who'd married into the family. Maria's son developed nightmares about men coming to take his mother away. The safe house psychologist documented his trauma, adding another layer to our case. Children suffered even when they weren't direct victims. The generational damage spread like poison through every branch of the family tree. The prosecutor subpoenaed phone records from the Castellano family. Text messages between brothers discussing merchandise and quality control made even hardened investigators sick. They'd developed code words over the years, but the context was clear. Women were products to be evaluated and sold. I testified for 6 hours straight, detailing every manipulation, every threat, every moment of terror. The defense attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, but the evidence supported every claim. When he suggested I'd orchestrated everything for attention, I simply pointed to my destroyed life as proof of the cost of speaking truth. Marcus took the stand against his family. His testimony revealed the grooming process, how boys were taught to see the tradition as protective rather than predatory. He broke down describing the moment he'd realized what his family really did. The courtroom fell silent as he detailed his father's lessons about maintaining family honor through control. The forensic analysis of the Italian contracts was devastating. Professional translators confirmed the documents were bills of sale, complete with terms of transfer and payment schedules. Some contracts included provisions for returns if the product proved unsatisfactory. The language was clinical, dehumanizing, undeniable. 3 more women came forward during the trial. Each had escaped the Castellano family at different times. Each had been silenced through threats or payoffs. Now they spoke freely, their testimonies painting a picture of systematic abuse spanning generations. The prosecutor had to request additional court time to hear them all. Mrs. Castellano's sister flew in from Maine to testify. Seeing her in person, I understood why she'd stayed hidden. She looked broken despite 30 years of freedom. Her testimony about the night she'd refused the examination and fled with only the clothes on her back left several jurors in tears. The defense's case crumbled when their own witnesses contradicted each other. Family friends called to provide character references accidentally revealed knowledge of the tradition. One elderly woman mentioned how fortunate the brides were to have their virtue verified by family. She seemed genuinely confused by the prosecutor's horror. Bank records subpoenaed from Italian institutions revealed the international scope. The Castellano family had connections to similar operations in Sicily and Naples. While we couldn't prosecute overseas crimes, the evidence showed this wasn't an isolated American tradition, but part of a larger network. Maria's husband tried to intimidate her during a court recess. Security intervened, but the damage was done. She spent the rest of her testimony looking at the exit doors. Still, she continued, her voice steady as she described the auction process, the buyers examining her like livestock, the payment that sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours, guilty on all counts: human trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering, racketeering. As the verdicts were read, Mrs. Castellano fainted. Her sons sat stone-faced while their father wept. Marcus kept his eyes on his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sentencing brought no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Mr. Castellano received 25 years. His sons got 15 to 20. The buyers who could be identified faced their own trials. Mrs. Castellano and other victim participants received suspended sentences with mandatory counseling. The judge acknowledged the complex dynamics of victimization within criminal enterprises. The community backlash was swift and brutal. Businesses that had thrived on Castellano money closed within months. The church lost half its congregation, split between those who'd suspected something and those who felt betrayed by their own blindness. Support groups formed for both survivors and community members grappling with their complicity. I returned to pack what little I'd left in storage. The town felt different, smaller, poisoned by revealed secrets. At the grocery store, people stared openly, some with sympathy, others with accusation. I destroyed their comfortable illusions about the nice Italian family who donated to every charity. Maria's divorce proceedings were expedited given the criminal convictions. She received full custody and a restraining order that actually meant something now. Watching her walk out of court with her son's hand in hers was the closest thing to victory I'd felt. She was free, truly free, for the first time in years. The Castellano properties were seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise. The main house, scene of so many Sunday dinners I'd loved, became evidence. Investigators found records hidden in the wine cellar, documentation going back 60 years. The tradition was older than anyone had imagined. Other families distanced themselves quickly from the Castellanos. The 3 other operations the investigation had uncovered went underground or dissolved. Without the protection of community standing and mutual support, the network couldn't survive exposure. Fear accomplished what justice couldn't reach. I started receiving letters from women I'd never met. Survivors who'd seen the trial coverage, who recognized their own stories in our testimony. Some had escaped similar families. Others were still trapped, but now had hope. Each letter reminded me why the destruction had been necessary. The financial settlements took months to finalize. Seized assets were distributed among identified victims, according to a formula that tried to quantify suffering. It was impossible, of course. How do you put a price on years of captivity, on children raised in trauma, on lives destroyed by tradition? But the money helped with practical needs. Marcus completed his sentence in minimum security, his cooperation earning early release. He sent one final letter apologizing for everything, acknowledging he'd never truly understand the harm his family had caused. He was moving across the country, changing his name, trying to build something from the ashes of his old life. I found work with a nonprofit focused on domestic trafficking. My experience, painful as it was, qualified me uniquely to help other survivors navigate the legal system. Every woman I helped escape felt like a small victory against the Castellanos and families like them. The nightmares faded slowly. Therapy helped, but time helped more. I learned to stop flinching at Italian accents, to eat pasta without remembering Mrs. Castellano's kitchen, to see wedding announcements without panic. Recovery meant reclaiming small pieces of normal life. Maria and I maintained contact through careful channels. She'd enrolled in community college, studying social work. Her son was thriving in their new life, the nightmares replaced by normal childhood concerns. We didn't talk often, but knowing she was building something good helped on the bad days. The case files were sealed after appeals were exhausted, boxes of evidence documenting generations of trafficking locked away in federal storage. But the knowledge remained in the community, in the survivors, in the systems now watching for signs they'd previously ignored. 5 years after that night Marcus first told me about the examination, I stood in a courthouse again, this time as an advocate, supporting another woman whose immigrant family had similar traditions. The cycle continued, but now we had precedent, support systems, and prosecutors who believed. The Castellano case had changed how these crimes were understood and prosecuted. I never returned to my hometown except for necessary legal proceedings. The place held too many poisoned memories, but I heard from others how it had changed. The Castellano name was gone from buildings, scholarships, memorial plaques. The family's legacy had been erased as thoroughly as they'd once erased Mrs. Castellano's sister. Sometimes I wondered about the women who'd chosen to stay with their buyers, rather than risk everything testifying. I understood their choice even as it frustrated me. The system had been designed to make escape seem impossible. Those who'd found small freedoms within captivity weren't villains, just survivors making impossible choices. The federal training program based on our case became mandatory for law enforcement in multiple states. I occasionally spoke at trainings, sharing our story with rooms full of skeptical officers who'd learned to recognize signs they'd previously dismissed. Each training felt like extending our victory beyond our individual freedom. On quiet evenings, I thought about the life I'd planned with Marcus, the children we'd never have, the family dinners that had hidden horror, the love that had been real even if built on lies, grief for what never was mixed with gratitude for escape. Both feelings were true, both were mine to carry. The work continued. Every month brought new calls from women recognizing their own situations in our story. Some I could help immediately, others needed years of support before taking action. The Castellano tradition was broken, but similar systems persisted in shadows, waiting to be exposed. I kept Maria's first letter to me after the trial. She'd written simply that her son had laughed for the first time in months. That single line reminded me why every loss had been worthwhile. Children laughing freely because their mothers were free. That was the truest victory against the Castellanos and everything they'd represented. The anniversary of my escape passed quietly each year. No celebration, just acknowledgement of survival. I'd built a life from ruins, found purpose in pain, created meaning from destruction. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, honestly earned and freely chosen. My phone rang with another unknown number, another woman needing help, another family tradition hiding trafficking, another cycle to break. I answered, ready to believe her, support her, help her find the courage to run. This was my work now, my purpose carved from experience. The Castellano tradition had ended with my refusal to submit. Now I helped others find their own refusal, their own escape, their own freedom. The cost had been everything I'd thought I wanted. The reward was truth, survival, and the knowledge that others would be spared because I'd spoken. Most days that was enough. Some days it was everything.